This is SoundNotion, the weekly podcast for new music and music news. I'm Patrick Gulo.
I'm Dave McDonald.
I'm Sam Merciers.
And I'm Nate Blyton.
And here's some banter, pre-show banter. Here.
It was supposed to go to me.
Okay.
We don't have a guest this week, and we're always thrown off a little bit when we don't have a guest, in part because, well, we don't know what to say next, but also because we're worried that you're not going to like us as much as you like other people.
We're very
I had something
self-conscious.
great picked out to start with.
Well, go for it, Sam.
It's
I don't want to
almost
stop
Thanksgiving,
you from...
so we have to say what we're thankful for. I'm thankful for atonality, tempo modulations, and neoclassicism.
That's what you're going with, really? Those are your three things?
I had to think of a third thing, so I threw that in there. Hey, I like Stravinsky's late pieces.
All right. Well, I don't know. I don't think I'm thankful for anything because I'm a cynical, cold-hearted human being. And I hate all of you and everyone that's listening at home.
That's right, ladies and gentlemen. You heard it from Dave.
So,
Patrick, what are you thankful for?
I'm thankful for how about this?
okay,
Not
guys,
having any
this is dumb.
damage from the hurricane.
This is dumb.
That's
That's what I'm
good,
thankful
Patrick.
Let's not do this.
What?
This is Dave's cynical side coming out right now. I'm thankful for all of you guys because you're so nice.
I'm thankful for life.
Well, I tell you, I'm thankful for the new piece I'm going to start working on. It's an orchestral piece,
Oh,
and
great.
I'm writing it. I'm collaborating with 2.601 million people to get it done, just
is
so I can beat Todd Mackover, who is collaborating with only 2.6 million people for his newest orchestral piece. Right,
What a
Dave?
slacker.
And it's a contest, right? There's a winner in this endeavor.
Yes. Yes.
So what are you talking about, Sam?
Well, Todd Mackover is working on a piece. We have a piece in The Guardian about a piece he's working on about, what is it, about Toronto?
Yeah, the city of Toronto.
Yeah, it's about Toronto, and it claims that it's a collaboration with not just with the city's orchestra, but also its 2.6 million residents. He is getting material from the populace. People are recording sounds like distinctive favorite sounds from around the city. He's doing something where he's going to get kids to like give him melodic ideas, how to link two sections together. I think it's hard to say a lot about it until we hear how it works, because this is the kind of thing it's easy to talk about in soaring rhetoric, but whether or not it amounts to anything is going to be when we see it done.
Yeah, but I mean, this is a guy who I would trust with technology and social media things more than just about any composer.
Sure.
I mean, Todd Mackover, we've talked about before on the show. His opera "Death and the Powers" is the crazy thing with the robots on stage, and I think he was nominated for the Pulitzer last year for that.
Yeah.
And he's created his own instruments. He's an MIT Media Lab guy. This is what they do. So while in most cases I'm pretty cynical about a lot of this stuff because I've heard a lot of it sound terrible.
If Eric Whitacre were advertising that he were going to do this, I'd be like, whatever. But this guy doing it, I'm really anxious to see what he comes up with.
Right, and he's got a lot of very solid. It's fairly structured, and it seems like it's a very long process. There's a lot of these kinds of collaborative crowdsourced things where for like a short window you can send in a recording that's like 3 seconds long. And he seems to be really interested in a lot more back and forth collaboration. And that's something he says. There's a quote from him in this article about this, where a lot of times when we talk about crowdsourcing creative things like this, it's a one-way thing. It's him asking you to give stuff, and you make your thing and you send it off, and that's the end of the collaboration. But he's really interested in making this back and forth. He wants to sit down with panels of people from Toronto and work through some of these things. It sounds really cool. He's got a video up. The Toronto Symphony has a video up with him talking about some of this stuff. I want to play just a little bit of that.
Toronto is a city that's incredibly spread out and horizontal and feels like it is infinite, that there's space and that you can let your imagination go. At the same time, it's a city that's one of the most vertical, dramatic, and aspirational, is very unique. I don't know of another city like it. I'm Todd Mackover, and I'm very happy to invite you to participate in an exciting new project called a Toronto Symphony. Along with my colleagues at the Toronto Symphony and at the MIT Media Lab where I work, we're doing something pretty unusual. We're going to make a new symphony, and what's unique about it is that I'm going to compose it along with you. We're inviting everybody in the city of Toronto to collaborate with me over the coming months to shape this symphony, to make the music, to make decisions, and to create it together. Toronto is one of the most international cities in the world, has every idea, every kind of person, every nationality, every sound that you can imagine. And one thing that's always struck me about Toronto is how it combines this complexity with an incredible sense of order and beauty as well. I've started off this process by imagining a kind of shape and picture of a Toronto Symphony. And I want to share that with you, and we'll use this as a way to imagine this symphony together. In a funny way, to me, it's
Looks
a
pretty.
kind of picture.
This is one of his projects from the MIT Media Lab, where this is kind of one of the goals of the MIT Media Lab in general, is to develop ways for people that didn't go to school for 53 years to participate in creating art. Things like this is where Guitar Hero came from, with giving some control over sound to people that are interested in making things but don't have years of background in the technical ways of doing that,
right?
The building structures and using advanced software, all those kinds of things. That's really hard. That takes a long time to figure out, and people just want to make stuff. So I think this is a really cool project. Any other thoughts?
I can't wait to see how it goes.
I'd love to go up and see it.
It's totally my kind of thing, though.
Yeah, for sure. One thing I'm not sure about is for the website of a lot of this stuff. I don't know how they're verifying that people live in Toronto, so the population of Toronto might be a little,
turns out to be
turns out to be million. Like 500 million people.
Hey, Canada actually is selective about who they give visas to. They don't. We had a guy at the shop who was considering. So
you're saying you couldn't get one?
He was considering moving to Canada, and they keep a pretty tight lid on who they'll let move there, and they have an age cap because people will move there, they say, specifically to take advantage of their health care.
That's interesting.
So they told this guy that works at the shop,
so you definitely couldn't get in.
That's it. So we have some unbelievably...
You know what group doesn't have an age cap?
What?
The U.S. Republican Party.
That's right.
Oh,
unbelievably
that's true.
fantastic news, followed by unbelievably predictable, terrible news.
Yeah, this kind of bummed me out. I was just reading this morning, and I don't know who found this piece. Well, I don't want to steal your thunder, but a research group, and this is written up in Tech Dirt. We have a couple of news stories from technology sites this week, which is fun. But Tech Dirt wrote this really interesting summary of a study by the House Republican caucus about copyright reform and some major fundamental changes, and about how copyright law as it exists today fails at its primary goals. And
they break
it's
it down
very
like
direct.
point by point.
Yeah,
it's pretty
go ahead,
pretty
Sam.
amazing. There's, like you said, there's a lot to document, but he breaks it down into wanting to. The first thing is they want to debunk myths about copyright law. And those are three big ones: that the purpose of copyright is to compensate the creator. And it says, no, it correctly notes it's about benefiting the public, is why copyright was originally instituted. And that's a complex issue, but suffice to say, it's not just to compensate the creator. Number two, that copyright is a representation of free market capitalization. The paper properly notes that in reality, it is exactly the opposite of that. That the current number three, that the current copyright regime leads to the greatest level of innovation and productivity. And I think we've beat that horse until it was dead and buried, that it is not what it does. And it puts forth some sort of policy suggestions about things that need to happen to make it better. Number one, statutory damage reform. In other words, redoing the calculus about how much people are fined when they break copyright law. The example they give, which is a good one, is that you could have, if you have a bunch of illegal music on your iPod, you could be carrying around like $1 billion worth of damages in your pocket.
Well, and this is like by somebody that watched the TED Talk video by Rob Reed, the $8 billion iPod, about copyright math, which if you haven't seen, you absolutely need to. But they're talking about willful infringement and how you can be charged over $100,000 for every piece of infringement. And so if you can fit all of this stuff on an iPod, you can be charged literally billions of dollars in penalties for each song.
Yeah, normally
$100,000 a piece.
No one's ever been charged for something like that, right?
No, but
like
they could
person?
be.
Right. So
well,
I mean,
woman,
why is it even an issue?
Several years ago, there was that woman in Minnesota who downloaded some content
like
through a torrent.
7 or 12, like not a lot.
7 or 12 songs, and the damages they were seeking from her were in the hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Yeah.
So no, nobody's ever been sued for $1 billion, but they have been sued for ridiculously large amounts of money. Number two, expand fair use. And this is something that if you're in music education, everybody's dealt with this and like wondered what you can and can't get away with.
Or if you make a podcast about music.
Yeah. So ease up on fair use. Here's a big one. Punish false copyright claims. Like takedown notices are just like the order of the day, whether they're justified or not, it seems like. So basically punish people, because it's not just, hey, it's there, you need to take it down. Does it or doesn't it comply with fair use? All kinds of different things involved in that situation. So people just send out the takedown notices or false copyright claims all the time.
Just to bully people.
Yeah, right. And then here's the big one. Heavily limit the terms for copyright and create disincentives for renewal. This is a big one, and it kind of has this calculus for like you it suggests have a 12-year term, which is actually shorter than the original one put forth by Queen Anne,
which was 14 years.
Yeah. But then you can renew it, but every time and you can keep renewing it, but every time you do, it gets more expensive for you personally to do so.
Right, and the amount is would be dependent on some formula, I guess, about how much money you're making on it.
Right, it wouldn't be like some flat rate for because obviously Disney, if it was just some flat rate that everyone used, it'd be no big deal at all.
Right,
for renewal.
So
right. And so this is the Republican Party doing this. And, people's personal feelings about politics aside, I think we can agree that this is not an expected move by the Republican Party. And the idea is put forth that let's see.
And
Springman,
Tector, I think, accurately describes this as a watershed document.
Yeah, watershed document.
This is a huge change in the direction of any governing body, much less the House Republican caucus.
And the Republicans they speculate that the Republicans are using this as a way to become the party, get the youth vote, become the party of copyright reform, which I think is all super awesome, except
and you can read the whole document. TechDirt's got the whole thing embedded, and you can download it from them.
Yeah.
Except less than 24 hours after that came out, and I was blown away reading it on my phone at work. Now the Republican Party is saying, no, wait a minute, that report was released before it was thoroughly vetted, even though their documents say exactly the contrary of that. Basically, they're saying we didn't mean it because the MPAA and the RIAA let loose their lobbyists on the Republican Party.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think if they took that position, they'd segregate their whole constituency from their current platform. I mean, they can't. That's like a total reversal.
A reversal.
Yeah.
A total reversal for the Republicans.
Like, yeah, if that were to go into, if that initial.
No, this is about personal liberty and all that libertarian stuff.
Yeah, to me, it sounds like them realizing that it's about personal liberty.
Yeah, but
anyway.
I mean, the people who vote for them are big corporations that do have these.
Corporations don't vote as much as law
no,
makes them
I didn't
people
mean it
like.
like
It
that.
doesn't give them any votes on election day.
Corporations are people, Dave.
Well, they're not. They're not clearly. If they're people, they're not 18 yet. They age in corporation years, which are like the opposite of dog years.
It's going to be a corporation suffrage moment here.
To me, this reads a lot more like the Republicans forgot that they're supposed to let people from the record industry write those kinds of laws and policy suggestions. Oh,
This is reminds me of a line from The West Wing again, as most things do, especially things about government. This is the classic Hollywood scandal, screwed up by telling the truth.
yeah.
Speaking of legislation and the House Republican Caucus,
On a tangentially related, unrelated topic.
this is not related to copyright issues, really. But some legislation working its way through the U.S. Congress right now is the Internet Radio Fairness Act. And if you pay attention to news about new media, you've probably heard about this. The Internet Radio Fairness Act is something that is being pushed heavily by Pandora and Pandora's founder, Tim Westergren, and also other music services on the web like Spotify, to drastically reduce the amount of royalties that they pay directly to artists. And we've talked about this a little bit before, that Pandora and Spotify, Pandora in particular, has to pay a lot more to artists per song play than other kinds of radio. They consider themselves internet radio, and they are governed under a slightly different system than would otherwise govern things like satellite radio or your cable music stations. Where
I don't think it's slightly different. I think it's a lot different.
Okay, so the amount of money is a lot different, but the way that it works is not that different. There is so for all performances, all public performances, songwriters, composers get paid statutory royalties that are set by law, and those are adjusted for inflation on a regular basis. Terrestrial radio that you can get in your car on your FM dial does not pay anything to artists. They only pay songwriters through and publishers through ASCAP, BMI, and CSAC. They don't pay, say, Atlantic Records or Warner Music or anything like that. They only pay the publishers and songwriters. Now, satellite radio and cable radio and now internet radio do have to pay the people that own the master recording, and those are usually the record labels, and they pay an amount that is set by a panel of judges. And for the satellite radio and the cable radio, that amount is about 6 times less than it is for what Pandora and Spotify and internet radio has to pay, because it is based on not the something like, I don't remember how this is worded. Sam, do you have this in front of you?
What, like the revenue balance and stuff?
Well, how this amount is determined?
Oh, how they come up with how much Pandora has to pay?
Yeah, it's based on a different
I don't have it in front
measure.
of me. Yeah. But I've got some numbers. Like satellite pays about 7.5% of their revenue towards royalties. Cable pays about 15, and Pandora pays half. So they're paying half of the money they take in goes out in royalties.
Right. So here's
How much money do they-
here's what it is. Satellite and cable radio, the judges set their prices based on a fair return and also giving the music service a fair income. So they decide what they think is fair to the owners of the masters and the owners of these web radio, or the satellite radio services. By contrast, online, judges set the rates based on what a willing buyer and a willing seller would do in an open market. And the problem with that is there is not much of a market, and so they kind of have to make it up. And when they make it up really high, then that becomes the willing market the next time they make the adjustment. So it's a big problem for these services. Now, having said that, artists and labels feel like they are not getting enough for the plays that they get on web radio services. And in fact, in an ad taken out this week in Billboard magazine, this is a huge full-page spread in Billboard, is kind of an open letter to Pandora and to the legislature about the Internet Radio Fairness Act, and it's signed by some big names, some less big names or former big names. The ones that you might know that are in the headline here are like Katy Perry and Pink Floyd,
Billy Joel,
and some people that I've never heard of, like Butch Trucks. Don't know them, and people that are not doing so much anymore, like Otis Williams of the Temptations and Frankie Valli. So it's kind of a large cross section, though it should be said there's still only 120 or so names on this list. Who knows whether there were more people that were interested in signing, but they wanted to put the people on this ad that you'd recognize. But you wonder if this is something that the artists themselves signed, or whether it's something that
their handlers,
like the labels, put this thing in, and it says, labels representing these artists think this thing. I don't know. It seems to me that what's happening to Pandora is clearly unfair to Pandora, but I think it's possible that it is both unfair to Pandora and unfair to artists, and I don't know how you solve that problem.
Well, right. If they're gonna scream like this about this, then they could just as easily say that, why aren't we getting more money? Why isn't terrestrial radio paying the performers? Why don't they make that a campaign?
Well, and that's part of this. There's another proposal. So there's this bill in Congress right now that's kind of sponsored by a few people on behalf of web radio stations like Pandora, that says, hey, web radio should really not. We should be paying a scale that's much closer to what satellite radio pays. And then there's another bill from the music industry that the music industry is too enormous, but record labels saying, hey, instead of, if we want to make it really fair, instead of taking everybody's rates down to the lowest, let's move everybody's rates up to the highest. And so they're saying that satellite radio instead should pay closer to what internet radio is paying. And it's silly that terrestrial radio doesn't pay anything. They do in other places. They just don't in the U.S.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting that it's kind of different services that each of them are providing, though, between terrestrial radio, XM radio, and Pandora or Spotify. It's like it's along
that's
a
kind
spectrum,
of like a continuum, right?
right? Of the user getting more specific with the music that they're listening to, of being able to select specific tracks on Spotify and having whatever's at the top of the charts on terrestrial radio.
Yeah, to me, Spotify is absolutely not radio at all.
Right.
Well,
But
it can be.
Pandora is radio, more or less.
So one of the problems that I think that this doesn't address is that Spotify actually can be like Pandora. You can tell Spotify, you can set up like a Spotify radio station that essentially works like Pandora. And those are still plays that are coming through Spotify, but I think we would agree that that's a fundamentally different thing than what's going on when you pick a
Use it
track
as a music
to play
player.
on Spotify.
Yeah.
But they're both Spotify plays. And I wonder if it's reasonable to have different rates for those, because there's so much gray area between those two things, and it's so new. And one of the problems is you hate to write a law now that is so specific to the technology,
Yeah.
because in 10 years that technology is not going to be the way we do
Yeah.
it. And
Well,
you
I
have
think
to
it
write laws to kind of these principles and these ideals that you hold, and then they just have to be interpreted to the technology. And one of the problems is laws not imagining other kinds of technology. This is
We need LTE laws.
LTE.
LTE.
Yeah, like long-term evolution.
Yeah, I don't know.
Like the new
like the 4G ish.
right.
So, Dave, I think
the
one
4G.
designation that might be useful to start working on legislatively would be the difference between, and you brought it up, but I would say the difference between like self-selected listening and algorithmically selected listening, if that makes sense, you know?
Right.
Well,
Like I went and picked all these tracks, or these tracks are being given to me based on some parameters and some algorithm that I don't have any understanding of at all.
well, I mean, that distinction exists. There is a distinction between.
This kind of distinction, though, that's what you were talking
I mean,
about.
there is a legal distinction between things that are like radio that you don't pick and things that are you pick. Like that's a real thing. That's a real legal distinction. It's called interactive streaming and non-interactive streaming, or web radio. But they kind of get treated the same in this.
We talked about this a couple of weeks ago. Tim Westergren, the Pandora guy, he puts forth the idea that if you eased up on these laws, there would be more competition in Pandora-style radio, which would raise revenues for everybody involved.
Right.
And it would encourage people to invest startup money in it. I mean, the guy, this Pitchfork article, which is in many, many ways completely preposterous, where Damon Krukowski of Galaxy 500 and Damon and Naomi is basically ranting against the what's the name of that bill?
The Internet Radio Fairness Act.
Internet Radio Fairness Act, talking about, but I mean, if he wanted to give people ammunition to say that guy's just living in the past, he has a lot of catchphrases here.
Yeah.
The biggest one is talking about, you know, what happened to the days when you made music, then put it on vinyl and sold it for more than it cost to make. And I'm like, if you're pining for that, if that's one of your argument points, it's hard to take the rest of your argument seriously, because that ship sailed a long time ago.
And there is, we should say, another part of this. So all these arguments about the royalties that are being paid right now are mostly about these songwriter publisher royalties. The royalties that go to the record labels are also negotiated individually on a label by label basis. And so an artist like Rihanna or Katy Perry is making more per Spotify play than this guy is.
Oh yeah, certainly, absolutely.
And that's because
interesting,
he
too.
is not on a record label that has any negotiating power with Spotify. Like Spotify needs Universal to be on their on their service, or it's not a useful service. They need Sony to be on their service, or it's not a very useful service. But if they don't have, Irritable Hedgehog on their service, that's not a loss to them. It's a huge loss to Irritable Hedgehog.
Right.
And maybe to the public.
And certainly to the public. Not maybe.
Here's-
Certainly. You people at Irritable Hedgehog are doing great work.
Here's that key quote I was talking about. Pandora and Spotify are doing nothing for the music business. That's how he starts, which we've talked about articles how you can debate what it's doing, but there are lots of smart people that can make arguments about the good things that it's doing. Okay, except undermining the simple cottage industry of pressing ideas onto vinyl and selling them for more than they cost to manufacture. The idea of doing that is still something that exists. You just got to figure out how to, work the system to your best advantage, and it doesn't involve selling vinyl.
And people still do sell vinyl,
it might involve
and they
selling
go on the
vinyl.
road and make their albums, and they sell them on tours, and they do that process and make physical media and exchange it for money. And people still do that, and it's still good. Saying that that Spotify and Pandora are not helpful to the music business, I think they're like terrestrial radio in that along those lines is even less helpful to the music business with that argument, which doesn't make any sense at all.
Right.
I mean, he's basically, he never comes right out and says it, but he's suggesting throughout the piece that Spotify plays and Pandora plays are stealing money from him somehow, and I don't think that he can hold that statement up.
Right, and he's making the same argument that a lot of people that get their dander up about piracy make, that every time somebody downloads their album, that's a person that would have bought it in the store, and that's not the case. I listen to so much stuff on Spotify, and I like this guy. I pay for Spotify Premium. I pay $9.99 a month for Spotify Premium, and it's awesome. And if you're thinking about doing it, you should try it, and you'll see how awesome it is, and you'll be sucked in forever.
And then you buy
For only
sometimes
$9.99.
based on Spotify, don't you?
I mean, even though you're right, even though I do pay $9.99 a month for Spotify, sometimes I still buy tracks. Now, what was I going to say? Ooh, I had a really, really good point about this.
It's about a discovery venue.
Well, yes. No, so what I was going to say is you can still sell things for more than you paid to make them. But you have to think about it a little bit differently. You can't think about selling things the way you sold them before. You have to make special things that people want to have because the things themselves are cool.
And that's artifact.
That's part of what, yes, an artifact. You have to make a little art piece. And that's part of, I think, this trend toward LPs is that even people, I know people that have bought these hipster LPs that are now a thing from new artists.
They exist in pop-up shops.
Say what?
Right. They exist in pop-up shops, or like these like one-off stores that you see everywhere.
Right. So I mean, I know people that have bought those that don't even have a record player, that have no intention of ever playing this record. They just think it's a neat thing. I think
that goes back to that conversation.
The big album cover is very, very cool.
Yeah.
And that's why people like these things now, I think. And if you look at artists and creators that are really successful today in the new media space and being more open to their music being in a lot of different places, a lot of them are making money by making these cool objects that they sell as art pieces. And they're not cheap. They're not going to sell as many of these cool art pieces as they would have sold, CDs in cardboard envelopes.
Would you equate this to the 1-bit Symphony release?
It's a little bit like the 1-bit Symphony release, yeah, because you can buy a recording of 1-bit Symphony, but it's not the same as playing it on the little thing that does plays it off the chip.
Right.
I
wonder how much money is generated from that, though, from selling those?
I
mean,
don't
I can't
know.
imagine
I have
it's
no
too
idea.
much. Not, I mean, that of course is a different situation than let's say like the Rihanna limited edition headshots in whatever.
So
But-
and the one that I have is kind of the cheaper version of it. You can buy like a special artist version that's like $125 or something, and that's the thing that I'm talking about.
Right.
You know, one of my guys that I talk about all the time is Cory Doctorow. He's an author and he gives his stuff away for free all the time, but he sells these kind of special artisanally created hardcover cloth-bound versions of his books, and you can download the thing as a PDF or whatever for free on his website to read on whatever device you want to read it on, your computer screen or your phone. It doesn't matter. But for fans of Cory Doctorow, it makes sense. It's a cool thing to have this object.
Right.
And it's handmade and hand wrapped by the author, and he makes 200 of them, and he signs them and numbers them like art prints, and they go for a couple $100, but he sells out of them, and the same could be true of the music industry. So I think we can kind of I hate to just dismiss this guy because he is, I think, making a legitimate complaint that his stuff is being consumed and he is not seeing any benefit to that. But I think there are other ways that he can monetize that he's just not thinking of because they are so foreign to the way content was monetized for the last 50 years or the last 200 years, if you want.
Yeah. Shaking your fists over this is not going to accomplish anything, and I think his article is nothing but shaking his fists in the air.
Well, it's like he's shaking his fists at the tide, hoping it will go back.
Yeah.
It is an incredible set of numbers too, though. Just like having, what is it?
Oh yeah, when we're talking about hundreds of a penny.
7,800 plays on Pandora, and he gets 21 cents for it. Like, I mean, which is 21 more cents than radio, but
sure. Well, no.
It's
Those
the
he's
same.
talking about when he's talking about that stuff. That's songwriting royalties. So he would get stuff from radio.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
He gets both because he's a
He
performer
gets both,
and a
and he
songwriter.
does in this article talk about the two separate forms of royalties. So he does get both because he's a singer-songwriter. Singer-songwriters get something from the master license and something from the performance royalty.
Yeah. You know, it's weird how this argument gets to be like almost like talking about taxes, where if you're for raising taxes, then you're a socialist. And if you're against raising taxes, then, you are a rich bastard who doesn't care about anybody. And
Well,
that's
that's
the
only true if you're not either a socialist or a rich bastard who doesn't care about anybody. And as far as I'm concerned, those are the only two people that exist in the world.
Right. Well, it's like, if you're against, you will probably find people that will say alternately, if you're for the bill, you hate musicians. And if you're against the bill, you hate musicians, Anyway.
So should we move on? I think we've definitely beaten that proprietary royalty-driven horse to death.
That
get to
horse's
some quick
family
news.
is sending us letters begging us to stop. Two pieces of big piano news. Well, one of them is big. One of them is interesting, I guess, for piano players. WGBH has launched a new piano podcast. It's about the act of playing the piano, I think. It centers on, like, cool new performances. So it's really like a niche sort of piano geek podcast.
We should have
where-
one of those.
Yeah. Is it called like Piano Forte?
It's not like just new. It's not new piano pieces or anything. The first episode, there's been one episode, is teaching, playing, and transforming Chopin.
Yeah, so it's not a new music thing.
I mean,
it's a
I think people who tune into this are just like, oh, it's an hour or half hour of piano, and I don't know how much more piano we need on classical radio. Like,
yeah.
and I
It's
thought
it
I was just
really
like,
is. It's so neglected in the canon, Patrick. How can you say that?
Yeah. I want a viola station. That'd be great.
That's what we need. I would totally listen to Viola Radio. Let's start that show. You heard it here first.
But that
Nate
was
is
show
going
would
to
end up.
host This Week in Viola.
That show would end up getting canceled on different weeks all the time because the viola player showing up to do the show would get lost on his way to the studio.
Yeah.
even though the studio is actually in his house.
Right.
That's right.
This
Somebody
is so
called the
many
violist
rooms.
and said, "Hey, I've got a gig for you," and he thought they were joking, so he didn't show up to do the podcast.
There you go. Yeah.
So what's the other thing you were gonna say, Sam?
The other big piano news is
this is sad.
This is pretty sad, especially if you've seen the Steinway film documentary. What's it called, Dave?
Which
Note
one are you
by
talking?
Note?
You talking about Note by Note, the making of Steinway L1037?
Yes.
Yeah.
Anyway,
That is a good
Steinway is set to sell the hall where its showroom is near Carnegie Hall. That's been there for 87 years and has been a place where world famous pianists for years have gone to try pianos, and it's been a sort of just a big part of the Steinway company and that part of New York, and they're going to sell the building, if I understand this correctly.
$195 million.
Yeah. They're going to sell the property, but then this is not confirmed at all, but they're going to lease a much smaller space within the structure and have a showroom, but it won't be the same opulent thing it is now.
Which is a huge bummer. It's such a historical landmark. This article in WGBH talks about Sergei Rachmaninoff and Vladimir Horowitz sitting down to work on things there in this showroom, which is incredible, and it's hosted some really amazing performers over the years. This is not a showroom like in your local music store where they've got a bunch of pianos sitting out that you can try out. This is a place that hosts piano recitals all the time, and so it's really sad to see things like that go away.
Yep.
So hopefully they'll be able to still do a lot of the cool things that they do in this smaller section of the space. And it's possible that there could be some rules put on the usage of this thing afterwards. I don't know if you mentioned this, Sam, that the building itself is part of either a national or statewide historical landmark register. And so things like the sale and its use and changing its use have to be approved by some board of people. So they could set some rules about its sale or its change of use. So
yeah,
who knows?
And
what's
we've talked
gonna
about on
happen.
the show that having a location designated as a historical landmark or something like that is not always a good thing.
It can be very problematic.
It drives that designation will make the rent Steinway pays to get space in that after the sale higher.
Right. And you know what's not related to this at all? Movies.
2 new movies coming out that sort of hinge upon a group of classical musicians. One is A Late Quartet,
Which we talked
Which
about
is
last
about-
week.
Yes, we didn't. We skipped it last
We
week.
skipped it.
I thought we
Yeah.
mentioned
Well,
it.
we
Oh,
talked
maybe
about it
not.
a lot.
Okay.
A Late Quartet. It's about a quartet where the cellist, played by Christopher Walken, finds out he's sick and he's going to die, and they plan their last performance, which is going to be Opus 131, Beethoven Quartet, which is this continuous thing that goes on and on and on. And the big thing they draw on in that film is there's a speech that Walken delivers in the trailer talking about how hard it is because you don't stop in tune, and as you get more and more out of tune, you got to work harder and harder to compensate with each other. And you're talking about some challenging music on top of that, so it's
But
easy
it's
to
like
see.
a metaphor for
It's easy to
the
see all the
interpersonal relationships between the members of the quartet. It's literary, man.
Yeah, so the metaphor is
Use-
drawn not with a fine brush, but with a paint gun, it seems like. I don't think anybody's going to miss it. And the other one, which we didn't actually know about last week, so I'm glad we held this over so we don't look like idiots, is Quartet.
Not to be
Not-
confused with A
not
Late
to be-
Quartet.
Not to be confused. And this is directed by Dustin Hoffman. It's about a retirement home for musicians, which sounds strange to me. Although this is in the UK, I think. So who knows what those crazy Brits do over there?
Socialists.
That's right. Socialist whack jobs. So anyway, it's about, this seems more of like a, I would call it a coming of age, but they're all old people. So I'd like, it's sort of like a coming of age film where you're having, having new birth in your old age, I guess. But it seems a lot more lighthearted and more like a comedy, whereas a late quartet is very like, sexually charged, interpersonally dissonant, etc. And Quartet, directed by Dustin Hoffman, does not seem that way. But anyway, can't wait to see what both of those movies, what the guys at Streamers and Punches say about both of those.
And if you see them, send us a note and let us know what you thought.
Yeah,
I have looked, and I cannot find a theater anywhere in Orlando that is showing a late quartet. I haven't looked for Quartet yet. But
Quartet is about singers, so there's going to be lots of arias and this kind of thing. And of course, a late quartet is about a Beethoven string quartet. So it makes me wonder, like, if you do the score for a late quartet, you're gonna you seems like you'd be obliged to be very Beethoven-y.
Yeah. We'll see.
Yeah.
Maybe this will have maybe this will coincide with a boost in sales of Beethoven quartet recordings. like the 50 Shades of Grey thing with Thomas Tallis.
Yeah, well, there's got to be a sex scene in the movie, and if they're playing any Beethoven during the sex scene, I'm sure that one will start selling a lot.
Yeah,
you got to do what you got to do. What do you guys say we bail on number 5 here?
What's your pick?
Let's go to number 6.
Let's.
So we don't have a pick of the week this week because we're lame and we don't have a guest. And normally our pick of the week is something by our guest.
Music.
And so we instead are going to talk about some of our favorite moments, some very individual, specific moments in music. And this is something that we started thinking about thanks to an article, and I cannot find it right now. Help me out, somebody.
Tomasini.
Tony Tomasini, thank you. And he talks about some of his favorite moments, and he's got a video in this post about one of them. And so we thought we would share some of ours. Patrick, do you have anything? I'll let you start.
I know we were talking about Rite of Spring earlier.
Before the show.
Right. I just want
to be clear. If you were watching this and you're like, when were they talking about Rite of Spring? You're not going senile. It was before we started. Sorry. Go ahead, Patrick.
Right before the Dance of the Earth in part 1.
Uh-huh.
In the Adoration of the Earth part, right before you head into that section, there's the most ominous chord you have ever heard in music, or I have ever heard in music. And they sit on it with like these really, really high strings and then these low basses, and it's just this creepiness that holds for about 5 seconds before. Do you guys know what I'm talking about?
I do.
That is one of my favorite moments in all of music.
Cool.
I wonder if we can find that.
I'm sure we can find it. I'm not going to play anything on here because, well, you can find it yourself, and there'll be just too much of it. Sam, what do you got?
I got a bunch.
Okay.
Well, some of them are more minor. Amazingly, I don't pay that close attention to lyrics, except when I do, you have a very profound effect on me. In Radiohead, in Rainbows, Weird Fishes, he's been singing the same phrase, and then at one point he's talking about how much he loves somebody, and he says, "What the line is?" Anyway, the tag, it's like he's been singing the same phrase, and then he just adds on this one line. He says, "On the earth," and holds over the phrase, and that one little line I really love. Kid A from Kid A, the title track of Kid A, about 70% through when the synthesizer comes in over the Gene Krupa floor tom sounding section. Mm-hmm. Nate knows what I'm talking about. Mm-hmm. Tom York, Atoms for Peace. The part where he decorates the melody going higher than at any other point in the song. These are all pop music, by the way.
Yeah.
Starolfer, the Sigur Rós song that we were just talking about. Michael Tippett, Symphony Number 4, Movement 2. The part where it finishes the first big repetition of the huge section about halfway through and then redoes the whole thing, orchestrationally inverted. When it starts the melody back is cool. Ravel G major piano concerto, second movement, when the orchestra first comes in, because you're just playing this like almost like Billy Joel chords, you know, at the beginning where you're just kind of ching, ching. And then the way the orchestra comes in is so perfect. The Chemical Brothers, Asleep from Day. They do this really cool thing where they have the first time through, the singer is singing, and they have the most stereotypical, sort of tried and true, no surprises transition back to the top. But sometimes that's what the music calls for. And it's just perfect. It slows down, and when it hits the beginning again, you absolutely know that's what's going to happen, but it's cool. The best one is In the Gloaming, which is a traditional song, but performed live by a rock singer kind of person named Jonathan Brooke. She does this live with her background singer, Ingrid Browden, I think is her name. This is the cool part right here. Awesome.
Are you done?
I'm done.
Are you sure?
I got up and did some research this morning. Excuse me for being prepared.
All right. Nate, what do you got?
It's a Radiohead one too. As I was thinking about this, and it's not actually any of the songs, but transition between tracks 2 and 3 on Amnesiac, or on their album Amnesiac. So the end of Pyramid Song, which is piano and strings and Tom York singing, as it kind of fades out with this weird synth repeated things. You aren't getting my hand motions because my video's frozen, but and then the track after that, Polk Pull, Revolving Doors, starts with just this really, really heavy, full spectrum organ and bass kind of pulsing. And then I have these memories of just listening to this in my car and having that transition just like hit you in such a way.
Agreed.
More than almost I like either of the songs, I like that transition.
Cool. I like it. All right. So I'll give you just a couple. I made a list as well, but they are I'm not gonna ramble on like some people on the panel.
Some people.
So one of my favorite pieces in general is the seventh Barrio sequenza, the oboe sequenza. Mm-hmm. And one of my favorite parts of it is the very last note. Because you've got the drone B. If you don't know this piece, you absolutely need to listen to it now because it's awesome. You should finish listening to this podcast first, though. There's a B drone the whole time, and then the oboe starts playing around with that B, and then eventually gets really far away from it and goes really crazy up high. And then at the end, when you've almost forgotten that the thing is there, the oboist just nails this B in unison with the drone that's been going on the whole time. And if it's performed right, the drone stops the instant the oboe player hits it, and so the reverberance of that B in the hall gets all mixed up with the drone that's going away as well, and it's like they've kind of melded back together, and it's a really cool moment. The other one that I want to point out, and this is something I think Sam, you probably are the person that turned me onto this. The Bad Plus's cover of Iron Man, Black Sabbath.
It was actually one of the ones I was going to talk about.
I was worried that you were going to mention it actually, because when you started going, I was like, oh man, he's going to mention the Bad Plus Iron Man.
When it turns major?
Yes, when it turns major, and I hate saying that because it's kind of a spoiler.
Man, they stretch the beat so hard in
It's
that.
so
too.
good.
They do, and
great.
it's not just that it's not major; it's that it's dissonant in every way, motivically, rhythmically. I mean, because they push
Okay.
and pull so much, and then when they finally give
We
you
need
the
to
big
stop.
major,
We need to stop because the disc stopped recording just now because it is full because we've talked for way too long.
It's your fault, Sam.
their rendition of Iron Man is awesome. Not because it's not that it's like. It's not just that it turns major, that part relieves all the dissonance you've had the whole way. It's like motivically dissonant, like, it messes around with the content. It's rhythmically dissonant because it pushes and pulls a huge amount, which they're really good at. And, and then all of a sudden you get, boom, the theme in major and with a steady, backbeat, And it's just awesome.
And I also feel like I remember the first time I heard it, the thing that I thought of was that they had earned this thing because it had been so there was so much tension in the thing that came before it that they really earned that release point. And that's actually something, one of the other ones I wasn't going to mention, but it reminds me, and this is kind of a maybe a bit of a cliche, is the Bach C major prelude from the first book of the Well-Tempered Clavier has this great thing where there's a G pedal, so it's on the dominant. And
I know exactly what you're going to say.
Like you keep getting this, like, and you keep feeling like, okay, the next chord is going to be where it resolves to tonic, and the next chord, and it's not that, it's the next one. No, not that, it's the next one. And it goes on for like 6 or 7 measures where you think that it's going to finally resolve at any moment.
It's
and
too
then,
far.
What? What'd you say?
The fifth too far concept.
Yeah. Yeah,
Oh,
it's so close, and then it keeps putting it off, and then finally it doesn't even give you this amazing big resolution that you've been looking for. It just kind of punts and steps away a little bit, and you get the big resolution a little bit later. But anyway, it's one of those things, just like the Iron Man thing, where like finally, like you've been waiting for this thing for so long, and to me that's what a lot of these great moments in music that I like are, or where it's a thing that the composer has been so restrained that makes you really like beg for this next thing, and then finally you get it or something like it, or they say screw it, you don't get it at all, and like that's what's cool to me.
I think there's
discipline.
probably that's a component of all the examples we heard today. I think.
Yeah, it probably is. It probably is.
Yeah, I mean, like even if you used the opening solo, bassoon solo of Rite of Spring, you could say that has sort of the same effect because nobody's ever started a piece like that, A, and B, with a bassoon playing that high in its tessitura.
So,
anyway,
I think we should probably wrap it up.
Yes,
that's going to do it for this week's SoundNotion. Thank you so much for joining us. Thanks to everyone who was watching or listening live in chat room. Really makes the show better when people do that, and we really appreciate the feedback that we're getting live during the show. To read more about any of the stories that we talked about, or the videos that we talked about, or the music that we just talked about, you can get links to all of those things on our site. That's soundnotion.tv/SN. And you can also leave us a note there if you would like to comment on the show. You can also connect with us on Facebook or Twitter. We're at SoundNotion on Twitter. We're also all individually on Twitter. I'm Dave McDowell. Sam is at Housegoy. Nate is at a Nate Tree. And Patrick is at Vox Shibuya. Is that right? Patrick?
Yep.
Okay. I remember all of them. So you should, if you have any beef with Patrick's favorite track or Sam's favorite 10 minutes, we'd love to continue those conversations with you on Twitter or anywhere else. This show and all our shows are available in the iTunes store, so be sure to go there and subscribe for free to catch every episode. If you'd like to support the show, on our site, soundnotion.tv, on the right side, there's a link to donate, or better yet, you can support us essentially for free to you by the next time you're buying anything on Amazon using our search box there on that right side to find the thing that you're looking for on Amazon, and we get a small commission. So we thank everyone who has already done that, and would encourage you to do that as you do your holiday shopping.
We'd like to remind everyone that Amazon sells very expensive electronic gear
And if you'd like to buy us any, we're open to that.
Or even if
buy
you're
it-
buying a new computer for your kids, you know,
Yeah.
$1,000 would go a long way towards helping us.
Yeah.
So if we get like 0.5% of that, that's not bad. I hate to bet it's weird. This is not like public television or, you know, we're not doing a telethon or anything, but you know, we appreciate your support. So anyway, thank you so much for joining us. We'll be back here next week. The SoundNotion's introduction includes music by Patrick Gullo and video by Tyler Lepp. See you back next week.
Butch Trucks.